In what's been pegged its third wave, the F word is becoming popular again. Yes, feminism. And central to the current debate is the idea that women's choices matter. To vote, act, dress as they see fit. So should feminists support all women's choices? Some say that certain choices are holding women and the feminist movement back. Joining me to debate this are Meghan Murphy, founder and editor of Canada's Feminist Current website and a self-defined radical feminist who's been critical of the choice feminism movement, and Jamia Wilson, executive director of Feminist Press, who calls herself an intersectional black feminist and is the author of an upcoming book on Beyoncé and feminism. Thank you both for joining me on UpFront. Meghan Murphy, you consider yourself a radical feminist, and you've said that the choice framework supporting women's freedom to make choices simply normalizes sexism, erases feminism, and works to remove the still dire need for radical activism. What do you say to fellow feminist critics of yours who say, you know, that kind of approach is policing what's authentically feminist? It's making feminism too narrowly defined. It doesn't give women enough individuality.
So the radical and radical feminism just means to get at the root. It doesn't mean extreme. All it means is to look at feminism as a collective political movement for the liberation of all women. So that's why I talk about moving away from personal choice as a focus and personal empowerment as a focus, because people can make personal choices as much as they want, but how does that contribute to the liberation of all women is the question.
Well, let me put that question to Jamia, and let me also ask you this, Jamia. You've spoken about feminisms as a plural that addresses, quote, a need to be more expansive about the definition of feminism. If, for example, women choose to work in industries traditionally viewed as harmful, objectifying, sex work, pornography, is that a choice that they've made that's advancing women's liberation, equality in your view? Because some would say it is.
I believe personally that, there needs to be a distinction that is made between human trafficking and also people who participate in the sex industry in a variety of ways based on their own choices and their consent. And we can look at social systems that would lead us to be in situations that could be objectifying, not saying that they are for all people who choose to work in that industry, but we also erase the experiences of people who say that this is about their own self-determination and autonomy. And I really find it problematic to be in the business of policing choices that women are saying that they are making for whatever their reasons are to survive and take care of their families.
It's not to be critical of choices and to talk about the context that surround and influence those choices isn't policing. So feminists who are critical of the sex trade are not criticizing the women in the sex trade. They're not saying you're doing something immoral, you're doing something wrong. But we see it as part of a larger context. So we understand that things like colonialism, imperialism, capitalism, and of course patriarchy, and white supremacy, racism, those all play into the choices that women are making to participate in the sex trade. And there isn't this clear line between trafficking and prostitution, or what some call sex work. The line is very blurred. There's not...
So if a woman who works in the sex industry says to you, look, Meghan, I made a choice, I'm happy to be here, it's a feminist choice, what would you say to that?
Well, I would say the fact that one woman is having what she says is a positive experience doesn't change the larger implications of the sex trade, what the existence of a sex trade means, which is around, male entitlement. And I wouldn't say it was a feminist choice because I don't understand how her choice to sell sex liberates other women, liberates women as a collective. I don't know what that contributes towards ending patriarchy.
Jamia, do you agree with that?
One thing I would like to share is that I haven't had that experience of working in that industry, so I can't speak to what every woman's experience is. But I can say that what I think is most important is that they do define their experiences on their terms and also share a collective story of what that experience may be. I think, being a part of an organization that
so in your view,
represents...
could those experiences be labeled feminist experiences?
In my perception and my view, yes, because I believe in a variety of approaches to feminism. Do I personally fundamentally believe that liberation will come when we dismantle patriarchy, capitalism, white supremacy and imperialism? Yes. But I also know that different people have different experiences and theories of change about how to get to liberation. And especially in times like now with the rise of authoritarianism and terrorism around the world, I'm interested in creating bridges to talk with other feminists about how we can build in spaces where we have common ground.
I think that if we're going to say, you know, if it's her personal experience, that her personal experience is empowering or liberating, therefore maybe the sex trade is fine, maybe it's even feminist, I think that that argument doesn't work, because what if a woman who is being abused at home says, my experience is fine, I don't understand it as abuse, I don't experience it as abuse, I'm fine. Are we going to say that man isn't abusive? If a woman is raped and she says, it's fine, I feel fine about my experience, are we going to say, well, that's not an abusive thing that this man did, that's not a harmful thing that this man did? Of course not. What we're talking about is what men are doing to women.
And you've said in the past that, you know, you disagree with the idea, quote, that if you simply think a thing is feminist, it becomes feminist. Mm-hmm. So for the sake of our viewers watching all across the world, what makes something feminist? What's your definition?
So feminism is a political movement to liberate women from the system of patriarchy and male supremacy. So I think that in order for a thing to be feminist, it has to contribute to that goal.
Jamia, would you agree with that? Definition?
My question to Meghan would be, who decides? Because I think that one of the things, for example, just going back to the question that you mentioned before around if someone experienced abuse but that wasn't, or abuse happened and they didn't experience it as such. I agree that those systemic problems should be addressed. But what concerns me is that when we focus our critiques in a way that we promote stigma in a culture that already undermines women's voices and experiences, or when we focus our critiques in a way that contributes to the politics of respectability, then we actually further silence people's experiences and make it harder for them to get access to the support they need. And one reason I'll say this, for example, when we were talking about the sex industry, is that criminalization, for example, is an issue that I'm very concerned about as a woman of color. And so I have a lot of concerns about furthering stigma and also normalizing a narrative that could actually be dangerous and threaten people's lives.
So feminists support the decriminalization of prostituted people. No feminist argues that prostituted people should be criminalized. That's what we're all fighting for. And, you know, I'm not sure how feminists contribute to stigma by criticizing systems of power that are racist and sexist and capitalist and really harmful. So on that note,
and Jamia has mentioned stigma, we've talked about sex work and pornography. On the other end of the spectrum, you have Muslim women, some Muslim women who choose to cover their faces with a veil, with a niqab. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of liberal feminist women in Europe, in France and elsewhere who have argued against that, even called for bans on that in the name of feminism, in the name of challenging patriarchy, misogyny, oppression of women. And there's a lot of Muslim women who wear those face veils who say, no, who defend it on feminist grounds, who say, we're doing this because it's our choice, we want to do this. Where do you stand on that?
Well, I think that for a lot of women who aren't living in the West, it's not a choice. And so I think that we should be taking that into account.
So if you're not in Saudi Arabia, but you're in France, and you're a Muslim woman who wants to wear a face veil out of choice,
I would never say that she should not be allowed to make that choice. I do think we need to, again, talk about the larger context for that choice. And, you know, as feminists, we do need to be critical of all misogyny and all sexism, whether that's rooted in religion or culture or whatever. But no, I wouldn't support a ban.
I want to address this because I'm an American, but I grew up in Saudi Arabia, and I have learned so much from very transformative feminists in Saudi Arabia and all over the Middle East, some of whom choose to wear hijab and some who don't. And I believe that in this instance, most of the critique that I hear about people who choose, who are not coerced to cover, has been mainly from white women who are policing the way that other women around the world are adorning themselves and representing themselves. And so I think that we also need to really deconstruct this when it comes to race, and also when it comes to paternalism and to really talk about it in a nuanced way.
Let me ask about men and feminism. There's an article on your website, Meghan, Feminist Current, which says, never before have we seen so many men clamoring to be feminists. If men love third-wave feminism, and they do, it's because they know full well it will not seek to unseat them. Is that a view you share?
Definitely. I mean, I think that the reason why men love third-wave feminism is because it promotes the idea that women can self-objectify and that's empowering, and that if we choose to wear stilettos and get cosmetic surgery and participate in pornography, then that's all feminist. I mean, it doesn't challenge male power at all. So of course men like those kinds of feminisms.
Jamia?
I differ in that opinion. I really feel like the men in my life, including the father who raised me, were engaged in feminism and present-day feminism because they see a place for themselves in it, and an inclusive movement that recognizes that none of us will get free when patriarchy still remains intact, when white supremacy still remains intact. For example, discussions that are happening within third wave and beyond conversations around toxic masculinity are also talking about how it harms men and how it puts men into a limited and narrow standard that doesn't allow them to be in the fullness of their human experience. So I really think that the feminism that I show up for has nothing to do with male validation. It has to do with inclusion and also collective liberation.
I just want to be clear.
We're almost out of time. Briefly, Meghan, last word.
I think that men can be allies. I know lots of men who are really amazing feminist allies. My point is that feminism is about women, and so I think it's important to center women's needs and women's voices, and I think that this movement should be led by women, and I think that men can support the movement, and I think that men can ally with feminists, but they should not be central to the conversation, and they should not be central to the political movement that is feminism.
Meghan, Jamia, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you both for joining me in the arena.
Thanks.
That's our show. Up Front will be back next week.